just to mention, I've spent 18 years in work integrated learning on the ground, running a program in science and technology areas. And I've been very much tied up in the practice of the practice, as will people are. Will, of course, is the term I'll use. I realise practice-based education is really the currency at CSU and in a few other places, but will, as defined in the Will report, is just an umbrella that holds, that creates something that all the others can sit within, so we all know at least kind of what we're talking about. Interestingly, when we were doing the Will report, one of the big questions people kept asking us was, are you going to come up with a definition for Will? It was impossible, just impossible. So we avoided it by saying it's an umbrella which collects all the approaches. Now I'm an evangelist for service learning. Again, another terminology that says everything and nothing all at once. But it's just an umbrella to hold under there what we mean, a whole range of things, and I will give a couple of definitions. Certainly, just as a preface to my talk, there's no question, and this is what I'll go through, although I'll skip over self-efficacy, but there's references to it, and I've included in all my slides references and quotes, so you can go straight to those great sources, most of them extremely recent sources, to get more information yourself. But yes, to preface the talk, the work integrated learning agenda is not going away. I remember when I was working on the graduate skills agenda at Griffith University, and many academics thought it was a fly-by-night. We'll pay some attention to it, we'll tick a few boxes in our course designs and unit designs, and hopefully you'll go away. Well, we didn't, and it really turned into, and I see it as being a major precursor for the Will agenda. And I well remember the day that Jan Orell said at QUT at a little Will forum we had, you people need to get together and apply for some ALTC funding to scope Will in Australia, which we did. And in that time it has continued to grow. The last few weeks you'll have seen reports in the higher ed and in Campus Review about statements by the Australian Chambers of Industry about work readiness of graduates and universities' role, and the quite important Business Council of Australia higher education policy, which really chucked it all into the ballpark of the universities, albeit Glenn Withers and others gave quite a nice rebuttal in terms of employer responsibility and doing it as Jan referred to this morning, as a partnership approach, which I think is quite critical. So what I'm going to turn to first is, and this is a lovely reflection on Stephen's talk this morning, what is the purpose of the university? There's a great book called Debating Moral Education, Rethinking the Role of the Modern University. And there's a chappie in America called Kiss who believes this. And I'd like to kiss something of his. And robustly he believes this. He is widely argued for believing this. Not only that, he goes on to say, oh, don't you just love him? But this book is a debate back and forth about that hypothesis of his. Fortunately, he's not the dominant thought. Derek Bock. Does the name Derek Bock ring bells for anybody? He was president of Harvard, I think for 20 years, and he actually came back and was an interim president at another time in the last 2 or 3 years when they desperately needed someone for a while. And he has written a book about our underachieving colleges, and he says instead we are about making the whole person. And his book is his items in this book, very interesting in that regard. And it's really refreshing to see. And in fact, if you notice, it's a relatively recent book. It's really refreshing to see that others are starting to say the same thing. And apparently in humanities literature, humanities of course being a discipline under siege, there is a lot being said in humanities literature about the true role of the university. Harvard, in its establishment, was very much established to create the better man. And it was the better man, not the better woman and man in its time. And in America, the land-grant universities, so the public universities, were literally created to create community leaders. That was their role and function. And this is not so long ago in our history of education, not quite as far back as Aurelius. So there is a resurgence of purpose. And in just a very recent book, one of the oldest aims is liberal learning, and citizenship is back on the agenda, which is very interesting because, if anything, our focus on work integrated learning has really emphasised the vocationalisation of our degrees, not wrongly so, but it really has emphasised that. And what's more, it's the Academy's responsibility to make sure that we cover off making the better person as well. So I thought Tony Mackenzie's presentation this afternoon was very interesting. He mentioned the 460 different demands of a curriculum being made by the different professions in the university. This is one of them, or a bunch of them as well. So we have a restating of the purpose of an education happening, which is probably the pendulum just swinging back and forth. And in line with that, there is this overall need by students for connection of their learning. And they are living in a different environment than the one we learnt in, for a start. Their style of learning is different, but they still need to be connected with the practice of their learning. But not only that, and it's the practice within encompassing who I am and how I'm going to impact the world. And this is where service learning comes in. I will just briefly let you read those. Self-efficacy is not disconnected with the whole notion of becoming a professional and believing I can change things in the world. And it's been, to focus on self-efficacy in students has proven to be pretty powerful. Put briefly, self-efficacy improves academic performance, which we all care about, and can greatly enhance self-efficacy. So that's action learning, experiential learning, practice-based education, call it what you will. So now, because I really want to focus on the role of service learning, especially in creating leadership capacity in students, I want to give you a definition for service learning. When I began my research into service learning, I thought I was going to align it somewhere on a continuum of will. I discovered it's actually along the whole continuum of will. And when I say, you can kind of insert will or service learning in many of the things that I'm discovering here. So it's credit bearing, it's a designed experience, it has to meet identified community needs, it contributes to a knowledge of course content, etc. But I just hate those sorts of definitions which you can't learn by heart. So I like the way Howard puts it. It's a pedagogical model that intentionally integrates academic learning and relevant community service, and you can even shorten it. So you could take the word intentional off and assume that if you like, but it's the integration of academic learning with community service. So that's what I'm talking about. And I broke it up for another talk I did just to say how similar it is. Really, you could approach service learning from, if we reflect on what Stephen Kemmis said this morning, you could say, no, we're just going to do service learning in all of its many permutations because it makes a better person. It truly does. But also, I would say the recent emphases on service learning, including, I was quite thrilled when Cooper and Arell et al.'s book came out that there was a substantial section in there on service learning, is because it's fitting so well into the will agenda, especially in the crowded placement environment. So if you can expand a discipline, especially a discipline type of experience for a student in somewhere where they give back to the community, it'll give them all of the same benefits as doing that in a commercial situation, but it gives them additional benefits as well. I actually describe service learning as will with soul. So it's more than just being ready for my career. It's me being ready for life, more so. So you can see it's extremely similar and fits very well into the whole work integrated learning agenda. Here are some of the outcomes. Now, what we know that it's going to do nice things for students because they're actually giving and helping. You know, it reduces risky behaviours, which is especially important for first year students. Service learning gives you an opportunity to give a first year student an experience with the real world that you normally don't do with work integrated learning, because we tend to save those for capstone type experiences. So they attain all these beautiful life skills, but, and Aston and Sachs are major authors if you want to look into service learning. Aston and Sachs are some of the ones you must read, but it has positive effects on academic development, including knowledge gained, grades earned, degrees sought over, and time devoted to academic endeavours. Wow! If you could say, show me a way to get students more engaged with their learning, here it is. That, in all honesty, is will. This bottom part is will. And much of this is as well, of course. It's just slightly different in service learning. And also to relate nicely back to what Stephen Kemmer said this morning, some studies have been done by Aston and Sachs that show that if students do service learning, volunteering, doing something in the community, they are inclined to continue doing that. They've been followed up for 5 years after. And here's another interesting outcome. Not only do they continue doing nice things, but they're actually more inclined to attend graduate school and go for higher degrees. Wow! If you had something that could increase your research higher degree students, wouldn't you like to do something about that? However, specifically, I did want to bring to you some of the literature that talks on the development of leadership skills. We might take the time to read this one. Controlling for students' pre-college disposition towards service, i.e. those who didn't think it was a good idea. Students who do spend time volunteering during college compared to those who don't become more convinced that they can change the world. That, we were convinced this morning, is the goal of higher education, to send out students who think, I can do something to better the world for others. And they develop stronger leadership skills. And those stronger leadership skills have been identified in a couple of studies. This is one of them. Again, we're referring to Aston and Sachs, but everybody refers back and forth to Aston and Sachs. And across 35 attributes that they measured on leadership qualities, they came out ahead. Another, so I didn't keep referring to Aston and Sachs. Notice in this one what the name of the article is, the links to retention research. How big an issue is retention still? And retention equals money for the university. Greater student leadership development, enriched learning, and improved academic performance. Now, I do need to point out a caveat here. Generally speaking, service learning in America, which is where much of the missing will literature is on outcomes, generally speaking, service learning in America is discipline oriented, especially if it's credit bearing. So it's generally discipline oriented. Again, you can claim much of that for will, because it's discipline oriented. It doesn't always have to be, of course. It's a great opportunity to get an experience in the world, which is a true liberal education, which is one of the benefits of service learning as well. And this article was about adult leadership building capacity. And even for adult leadership building capacity, where they do have their own experience to reflect on, it is far more powerful for them to do it in an action learning environment than any of the other classic leadership building things such as coaching, life coaching. So, what do the students think? I came across this really lovely little item that was written by 2 students and an academic. And here's what students found. Both the students, that is Ewa and Farid, had done a service learning experience and were still engaged with the university. And they asked the question, if it's so powerful in developing leadership, and it is, why doesn't the university use it more? Now, are you brave enough to see what they proposed as the response? Because it's challenging, it's threatening to the status quo, it allows for mistakes, it means sharing power and responsibility between youth and adults, blurring the line, and with that distinction gone, the ageist hierarchy collapses. This really reminded me of previous presentations I've seen of Jan, where she points out the controlled and uncontrolled environments of the classroom versus real-world experience. And what they say is in service learning, the entire world is transformed into a classroom under construction. And I think that fits beautifully with the presentation I just heard from Francisca Treaty about the power of reflection as well. You know, it gives students something to reflect upon when they're actually engaged in the real world. Let me just catch up with my notes. Okay, now if you were to look for other authors that you would really want to engage with in this regard, it would be Bingle and Hatcher. They are key authors in America on service learning. What's interesting is their the last few lines. Service learning is a very necessary component of effective civic engagement. However, what this quote tells us is that it's not just about you or me deciding we'll do a course for it. There has to be an institutional engagement for it. How much more powerful is it now when institutions have centralised will support processes? When will staff are actually residing in academic development units, which was pointed out earlier would not have happened 10 or 15 years ago. And I would propose that you have to keep your eye on this space of service learning, because you will see more and more universities taking this approach, because it's seen to be a powerful form of will and a powerful form of training for students and a powerful way of achieving graduate attributes. So I know with the Griffith graduate attributes, our last 2 are something to do with internationalisation and intercultural awareness. And the last one is about civic and social responsibility. How do you do that in an engineering degree without, you know, substantial creativity? And service learning, as we become held more and more accountable as we are, that our graduate attributes aren't just rhetoric, service learning will come more to the fore. University of South Australia has significant approaches to service learning, University of Western Australia, Macquarie University, and as you now know, Griffith University, just as examples, University of Newcastle as well. So it will be a growing emphasis in the world of will, if not just simply for its own benefits. But wait, there's more. In the present economic climate, one of our biggest goals is to increase accessibility to university and the equities that are involved in that. What some of the research that I have been reading has shown me is that retention is improved through service learning to a marked extent. There's a piece of research, there's 2 pieces that I brought with me. From Campus Compact. Campus Compact is a group of 1,200 university presidents in America who are committed to civic engagement for their institutions. And this is a fantastic piece of research which actually graphs the difference in Pell students, so that's students who get a government grant to be able to access college or university learning, and the The difference in their GPA scores, I don't know what you can see from there, but there's one line a lot higher than the other. That's students who did community engagement during their degree versus students who didn't. And the retention rates of students who are engaged in community engagement or service learning through their degree. In America, this is a 25-year-old agenda now, and they're getting some very mature research, which I believe is going to drive us as well. Another article is Service Learning and Academic Success, the links to retention and research, which I think I quoted. Brilliant piece in terms of breaking it down to all of the component parts of why it has an impact. So I think that's pretty much it, except for that quote. I flew up down to Sydney yesterday, and if you're flying to anywhere and you're reading the Virgin magazine and there's a page missing, this is it. But considering what I was going to talk about, there was this beautiful John F. Kennedy quote which University of Melbourne is using for its MBA promotion. You know, that leadership is a huge thing in terms of societal needs. And when I talk about leadership, it's not leadership framed as I'm in charge. It's leadership framed as I can effect change and make a difference. So I think, yes, on that note, if anyone has any questions such as, oh my God, what is service learning curriculum? How do you do it? And how expensive is it? Etc., etc.